Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show, by any host, or by any guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before you begin any new diet, exercise, or training program. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. On Healing Ties, we're creating a life to love after caregiving ends by sharing stories and resources and being with awesome people like you. Now that caregiving has ended, let the Healing Ties begin. Here's your host, Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy.
Well, greetings everyone. It is Chris McClellan, the Bow Tie Guy, for another episode of Healing Ties on the Whole Care Network. Thanks for joining me today. If you are a first-time listener to Healing Ties, welcome. And that might mean you're also a first-time listener to the Whole Care Network, unless you're following one of our other show hosts, which I certainly appreciate. But here on the Whole Care Network, we're all about story sharing. We believe it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to combat a common cause. And on Healing Ties, we specialize in story sharing. As you know from my caregiving experience, I was fortunate enough to have our caregiving story publicized in a 2015 Pulitzer Prize nominated story, In Sickness and Health, A Couple's Final Journey. But I also know that there's thousands and upon thousands of caregivers out there that have important stories to share. And that's our goal here on the Whole Care Network, is to share those stories, because when a caregiver can share another story to a caregiver, there's that instant connection. And we know that we find that support out there. Oh, we want to send a hello and a shout out to all our friends over in the UK on ukhealthradio.com. We thank you for your support of the show and comments. And if you have any comments or suggestions about a show on Healing Ties or the Whole Care Network, feel free to send me an email at chris@wholecarenetwork.com. That is chris@wholecarenetwork.com. So let's move on to today's episode of Healing Ties. My guest today, Lois Swope, is working to inspire deeper compassion and understanding in caregivers by sharing her experience as a parent of a child who lived with a chronic illness and disability. Lois is the mother of Carly Whalen, who lived with Rett syndrome. From her birth until her death in 2012, Lois and Carly were on a difficult yet incredible journey together as they worked to find compassion and competent care. And Lois, I might have not pronounced Carly's name right, but I'm really happy to have you on the show today.
Yes, thank you. It's my privilege to be here. Carly's last name is Wallene.
Wallene.
You were close.
Well, and I try my best, because I'm so self-conscious about my name being mispronounced, but I appreciate your understanding there.
Yeah, no worries. You said my name correctly.
Well, so I'm going at 50% already, so that's good.
Good start. We're off to a good start.
We're off to a good start. So I've been looking so forward to having this visit with you. Our mutual friend, Barbara McAfee, introduced us. And, of course, Barbara's appearing on the Whole Care Network with her podcast series, Songs for the Caregiver's Soul. Oh, goodness. We both know how wonderful some of her music is. But enough of Barbara. Let's talk about you. Let our listeners know a little bit about your background, and we'll get into talking about your just unbelievable story with your beautiful daughter.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's lovely to be a part of this audience. My background is that when I was 25 years old, Carly was my second child, and she was born, and everything seemed to be normal, and there were no concerns at her birth. But by the time she was a few months old, it was evident that something wasn't quite right, and that she spent an awful lot of time just crying every day. And I tried so hard to meet her needs, and it felt like I was never able to figure out what was going on, and doctors weren't able to help us either. So Carly lived with a disorder that we didn't know about. No one really knew about it at the time that she was born, because she was born in 1985, and the first girl diagnosed with her condition, which was Rett syndrome, was diagnosed in the U.S. in 1983. So doctors and therapists and most people had never even heard of it. So we lived for many, many years without knowing what had happened to Carly. But how it resulted in her was that she never walked, she never spoke, she had limited use of her hands, she had all kinds of digestive issues, scoliosis, seizures, and huge breathing issues where she would turn blue hundreds of times daily, and then hyperventilate to counteract the lack of oxygen. And so life was really challenging. And it wasn't until she was 12 years old that we actually got the diagnosis of Rett syndrome and started to have a better understanding of what had happened to our little girl. So most girls with Rett syndrome, most children who have Rett syndrome are girls. There are some boys with it, but they are born normal, and somewhere between a few months and 2 years, they start regressing and losing almost everything that we consider part of a normal human experience. But the one thing that Carly taught us that has made her stand out is that by the time she was 10 years old, prior to her diagnosis, we discovered a way for her to communicate. And what Carly was able to teach us was that just because she had lost all of her physical capacity, that she had not lost her intellect. And she was very, very intelligent and capable in her mind. And she has gone on to inspire other families who have children with Rett syndrome worldwide, and continues to this day to believe in these children who were born, lost their physical capacity, but have not lost their capability mentally, intellectually. So that's part of my story.
And it's already powerful, but goodness, I guess the question that really comes to mind as we look at this big sphere of caregiving, there's this, I don't think it's a misnomer, or maybe it's just a lack of education, or really a reality, is that oftentimes caregiving is associated with people who are dealing with end-of-life issues, seniors, but that's not the case. That there's a whole community out there, just as you're bringing awareness to, that parents who have a child that has a chronic illness, that not only are they in their parenting roles, they're a caregiver from the time that child is born.
Well, and most of us, when we give birth to children, we expect the first few years to be very hands-on and lots of care and sacrifice needed. But there are, I would dare say, millions of families who are impacted worldwide by a child who is born and, through no fault of anyone, ended up with a complex medical condition or disability that is going to require lifelong care. And we end up in a spot that we never anticipated. And, most people when they're pregnant say things like, well, I don't care if I have a boy or a girl, I just want them to be healthy. And those kind of comments are really particularly hard for families like mine who had a typical pregnancy and had no expectation of anything being wrong with our child. And we ended up with what most people would consider their worst nightmare, which is to have a child whose needs are going to be enormous, and that there's really little you can do to make life okay or better or easy for them, even though you give your best effort to do so. And it is, I'm grateful now for things like these kind of connections, Chris, through podcasts, through social media, and through the internet. Things have changed dramatically since Carly's birth in 1985, because it was so isolating. But I dare say that for many people who are caregivers, it still is a very isolating experience when you're raising children who have very complex medical needs and disabilities. And your life becomes a series of appointments that don't often result in anything improving. Just
Right.
lots of appointments and a lot of stress, and it impacts the family in profound ways. And we love that child so much. I mean, for most children who are born, there's profound love and commitment and sacrifice for that child. But for children who never grow independent of our care, that love and relationship grows even deeper. And in Carly's case, she lived for 27 years at home and died in my arms. And that's a painful statement to even make, but I was there at the very beginning, her first breath, and I was there for her last. And there was a lot of life and pretty miraculous things that happened in between. But we went through an awful lot together, and she taught me so much about life.
Well, and one of the many comments that I read on Carly's blog, and I think this is probably the most appropriate time to share this, and I know you probably already know this, but as Carly wrote, she's been surrounded by lots of love.
Yeah.
But I just kind of think back to what you just said about being there for her first breath and being there for her last breath. There's some beauty in that, Lois. I'm just a firm believer that we talk openly about these delicate topics, that if we're going to be present for the birthing process, as that has changed over the years, where people are going in with families are going into the maternity room and everybody's welcoming the birth of their child. I think it's equally so that that we're there at the end of life, that people don't make that transition on their own, and it was important for me to hold my partner when he made his transition, and I appreciate you sharing this part of the journey, because it's something I think everybody needs to hear.
Yeah.
That it's a part of it. This is a part of life.
Yeah. It certainly is. And I think, Carly prepared us for her end of life. She was not afraid. She knew that she was dying. Mm-hmm. She told us that she was dying before we were willing to accept it. And
right.
We had 6 months together. And those 6 months were some of the most peaceful, beautiful, and heart-wrenching 6 months of my life. And yet I wouldn't trade any of those days with her, and her wisdom and insights and her gratitude, and just the peacefulness of allowing things to be what they were. She said near the end of her life, I'm not trying to die. I'm just accepting what is happening to my body. And her body was really shutting down, and we had done everything we could possibly do to meet her needs throughout her life. But as with Rett syndrome, there's so many complications that our life had become a series of appointments that didn't result in any kind of improvements. And Carly was the one who said, it's enough. It's enough. We've done everything we can do, and I have done everything I'm supposed to do here. And she had been doing a lot of writing. She had become a composer. Yes. She was a poet. I mean, she did so many incredible things that I never imagined my child doing because of all of her limitations. And as a result of all that, she felt her work was complete. And so for her, there was an acceptance and an allowance that I, as a mom, was in no way to let go of my constant need to improve and make things better and to nourish and to protect life. It's something that I think maybe is unique amongst caregivers who are parents of children with special needs, is that drive to protect our infants never goes away. That drive to protect the most vulnerable in our family is present with us throughout their life. So it's not like they lived independently from us and then, then became ill. It's like their care has been in our hands every day. And so it is, it's a unique kind of loss to lose a child who you cared for every day of their life. Because they're so much a part of you. They're a part of the family identity. Right. They're part of the daily routines, and their life depended on you.
Right.
And then when they die, there's a unique kind of loss.
Goodness. As I read in some of the blog posts and looking back at Carly's life, there was something that there was a couple of things that it just really tickled me when she had mentioned, and I don't have this verbatim, but she was able to demonstrate to you that she learned how to type.
Yeah.
And I listening to you today, I'm thinking, well, that might have been right around the time when you recognize how to communicate with one another. Can you kind of take us through that experience?
Yeah. Well, Carly's oldest sister, Leah, my oldest daughter, loved books as a child, loved them. Every week, Carly and Leah and I would go to the library, and little Leah, at about 4 years of age, would pick up the biggest stack of books she could get at the library and haul them over to the counter, and the librarian at that time would scan them for her and give them back to her with a smile. And we would go home and read those books from beginning to end every week. And Carly was, I would sit and hold her while we were reading, and she would be nursing a lot because that was the only thing that comforted her when she was an infant. And when she was done nursing, she would sit up and I'd prop her up on my lap. And I noticed from the time she was a little baby that she would look very, very closely at the words, at the letters on the page. And I thought that was interesting. I thought, well, maybe it's just the contrast of the black and white, because we were told she was very visually impaired. So she would get super, super close to the page, and I'd have to read around her little head. I did that for years until, Leah was able to read on her own. But I would continue to read to Carly. And when she was about 7 years old, actually 5 years old, I would be torn between reading ABC books or something more suitable to her age. And when I picked up the ABC book one day, she grabbed that book and threw it across the room. And this was remarkable because this is a little girl who had very limited use of her hands. So she was very determined to try and demonstrate something. But I had no way for her to communicate with me at that point in time. So I just looked at her and was like, Carly, so I'm guessing that you want to read a different book, not ABC baby books anymore. And so what she was, when she was 10 years old, she and I were sitting in a chair and we were reading the Reader's Digest. You probably remember that publication.
Oh, yes.
And I read her a story about a young man who had spastic cerebral palsy and was born in the 40s or 50s. And the only option the family had for his care was to institutionalize him. And they stayed in touch with him and saw him regularly. But when he was in his 30s, they brought him a typewriter. And they discovered that if they held his hand a certain way, it stopped some of the random spastic movements that he had, and that he ended up being able to type and was able to communicate that he was very intelligent. And Carly would normally, when I would read long stories like that, would lose attention and, be distracted and do her fiddling and stuff that she would do with her hands. But she sat with her nose about 3 inches from that page and listened to every single word. And I told her, I said, Carly, I have no idea if this is going to work for you, but I'm going to do everything I can to find someone who can help us figure this out. Maybe this would be the thing, because she had so much random movement with her hands that she couldn't control.
Yeah.
And so we just asked, I went to this school, the community or the therapist at the school, and I said, I asked for a evaluation outside of our school district, because they had already determined that Carly was profoundly mentally impaired in ours. And this other person who was a specialist in working with kids in the autism spectrum came out, and she introduced Carly to everything from cue cards to picture cards to word cards, and then brought out a little tiny typewriter that had a little ticker tape that came out the side when she typed. And Carly was able to type out words that very first day. And so our life changed immediately. It was a profound impact on our life. And so it wasn't just a little girl who was profoundly mentally impaired anymore. It was a young girl who was locked up inside of her body and had a lot to say and a lot that needed to come out. And boy, did she start. She from the very beginning was able to have a voice in her own life and tell us what her favorite color was and what her nickname was, what she wanted to be called, what she liked, what was hurting on her body. And so, needless to say, it was an enormous gift. And Carly went on from there to type millions of words that we are left with to this day, because everything that she said was vital and important. And every single word that she would type out very painstakingly at the beginning, I would stop after each letter and write that down. And eventually we started using technology to help us with that. And so almost every conversation we've ever had with her is recorded somewhere. So I'm grateful for that. I'm deeply grateful. I don't have to think, what did Carly say about that? It was something like, I have the exact words that she said.
I think the word that's coming to my mind here is freedom.
Yeah.
What the communication, being able to communicate, must have been such a freeing experience for both for not only for Carly and for the entire family.
Yeah. It was. It changed everything, because Carly typed out later, many years later, she said, before I had communication, I was so oppressed, I wanted to die. I was a little girl, and I felt that way. And I guess what that has done for me is that it has given me the confidence to know that everybody needs to have a voice in their own life, and that we as caregivers need to do, especially for children who are born without the capacity to communicate easily, that we need to do everything we can through the use of technology, and in whatever form it takes. We didn't have technology available to us when Carly was little. It was just emerging, but that we need to do everything we can to find a way for people to communicate, because even if it's yes and no, we can ask really good yes and no questions as caregivers and get to the bottom of things, because that was on Carly's hard days and days when she wasn't doing well, or she had been injured, or she was in pain. She couldn't type, but we could always ask yes and no questions, and she'd be able to respond to them. And so there's ways of doing that, so that you're not guiding the conversation, that you're just giving them a voice and asking good questions. So.
And I think what you're also teaching me, and hopefully hopefully our audience as well, is the ability to look at the entire person.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's the piece. Is one of the things that Carly taught me is that everyone is more than their symptoms, and that their diagnosis does not determine who a person is. I often say, what if I was only known, if I had to introduce myself was, well, I am Lois Swope and I have severe dry eye, or I have plantar fasciitis, and that's all people would know about me. But when you have a visible disability or a movement disorder or a complex medical condition, you're often only known by your diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such an unfortunate way to go through life,
Right.
because there's so much more. And I think when I finally learned that lesson when Carly was, in her early teens, it changed everything about my approach to how I interacted with her, the kinds of books I read to her, mm-hmm. the kinds of radio shows or TV programs, or the kind of classes we would seek out, the kind of opportunities in the community that we would seek out changed dramatically when I started seeing Carly as this whole person who loved nature, who loved being around people, who wanted to get out near water. She loved all the lakes and rivers that we have near our home and wanted to be near water because it calmed her body down. Well, I didn't know any of those things before, but, seeing her more as a whole person and the kinds of things that would add value to her life and how much she loves flowers and listening to the birds, even though she couldn't see them, she could hear the birds and she loved that. So it was in many ways it was simple things, but it changed the quality of her life, and it certainly added more joy to my life to try and imagine other things and other ways we could be involved with horseback riding and all those kinds of activities that ended up meaning so much to her.
Because she had a favorite pony.
Yeah, he's little Bo. He came to live in our backyard, and he's still with us.
Oh wow! Okay.
Little Bo is quite a stud. He's a little miniature horse, and Carly was I noticed when she was a young girl that all of her breathing dysregulation and hyperventilation and breath holding would go away when she was on the back of a horse. And so she was involved with therapeutic horseback riding for years, and I volunteered with that program, and we thought, well, it's such a bummer. We live in Minnesota, it's like we can ride for 4 months out of the year before it gets too cold to even consider that. And so we discovered that there are little miniature horses being used as guide horses for the blind, which is a whole nother fun thing to learn about. But we saw a miniature horse show one day, so Carly and I wheeled into the county fairgrounds and talked to people who had miniature horses for sale, and eventually talked my husband into getting, we called it our house pony. He doesn't live in our house, but he does come into our house. He came into our house when Carly was alive, and when it was too hard to get her wheelchair outside because of the snow and the cold, and she couldn't handle the cold, he would come into the house and ride in our van and go places in town with friends and stuff. So he's still with us, and he's a little handsome little man, that's for sure.
Oh, goodness.
He's a strong connection to Carly for me.
I know, Lois, we're just kind of scratching the surface today, and we've just got a couple of minutes left in today's show, but I'd really like to invite you back and do. I really think your topic is so important that I think we really need to do a series of podcasts on Carly and your life and your family's life, and I think this is something that is important, and we want to help you be the conduit to get your message out.
Well, I'm deeply grateful for that opportunity, Chris, and I welcome the opportunity to have further conversations with you.
So let our listeners know how they can contact you, find Carly's blog. I'll give all your important contact information. Okay.
Well, you can find me at loisswope.com. It's SWOPE. There's 2 S's in the middle with loisswope.com, and there's a contact page there. My email is there. And Carly's blog that is still up and still has hundreds, if not thousands of people some months visiting her blog page from all over the world still to this day, is Spirit Dances with an S on the end, .wordpress.com. And Carly titled her blog herself, Spirit Dances. So that has significant meaning to me now, but spiritdances.wordpress.com. And you can find all of her writing. And Carly's music can be found on CD Baby under Carly Wallin. Karly is her name, Wahlin. And you can find her song, her first CD, and her final song that she completed 2 weeks before her death has remained untitled because she was not able to title it for us. So there's some profound things out there for Carly's voice, and I'm working on trying to write our story. So that's a whole nother.
That's a whole goodness. And we'll have all of Lois's and Carly's information available on our Whole Care Network blog. So we're going to end today's show with one of Carly's songs. But Lois, it's great to connect with you. Thank you for sharing your story, and this is really just the beginning of what I hope to be a part of with you on the Whole Care Network. And you are certainly someone who's creating healing ties all around us. Thanks so much for joining me today.
I'm grateful.